Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. For the first hour today, we'll be having a meeting on the emissions reduction policies, greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, following the motion adopted by the committee on Friday the 15th of November. And it's our pleasure to have with us today the Honourable Minister Guilbeault for the Environment and Climate Change. And unless I'm mistaken, you have opening remarks to make, Minister, for a total of about 5 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I think it's about that, yes. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson and members of the committee. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Let me just say a few words first about COP29, which ended a few days ago, on the weekend in fact. Canada came to COP29 with a purpose to demonstrate that multilateralism matters, especially when it comes to the climate. Our climate ambition remains unchanged despite the challenge we face. We successfully pushed for the adoption of a renewed work program on gender and in support of Indigenous peoples. And we've called for greater ambition when it comes to mitigation. We've collaborated with island countries and those that have not made as much progress when it comes to international cooperation. We've announced a new climate finance agreement along with my colleague Ahmed Hussein. By signing an agreement at COP29, we have demonstrated that the Paris Accord works well. Now,
focused on some random international assessment that doesn't reflect Canada's policies and reality, we are continuing to get credit for the results of our climate plan. Over the past years, our climate plan has been assessed and reviewed by credible international institutions like the International Energy Agency. They have acknowledged when ranking G20 countries that our plan is ambitious. Canada used to be one of the worst performers 9 years ago, and today, organizations like Climate Action Tracker recognizes that Canada's plan is credible and transparent. The latest UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme, GAP report says that Canada has the first comprehensive roadmap to achieve the 2030 target. This was unthinkable 9 years ago. Our government has put forward very ambitious measures. International organizations have noted that at the end of 2022, Canada followed through on its commitment to end international public finance for fossil fuels, a commitment that was made, I might specify, under the previous Harper government, and that we've put forward some of the most ambitious regulations with the goal of reducing oil and gas methane emissions by at least 75% from 2012 levels by 2030. Building on the actions of millions of Canadians, the government continues to take action to reduce emissions, to fight climate change, while strengthening our economy with good jobs and clean industrial growth, a healthy environment to all Canadians. First, let's talk about progress. Since 2005, Canada's emissions have dropped by 8% according to the Canadian Climate Institute. Canada's emissions are at their lowest point in 25 years, and we're on track to meet our interim 2026 goal, and we have a fair shot at meeting our 2030 target. At the same time, that our economy is growing and that inflation and interest rates are coming down. We are capping pollution, not production, from the oil and gas sector, a critical step towards fighting climate change while requiring investment in decarbonization. Under a Harper Poilievre Conservative government, estimates show that Canada's emissions would be 41% higher by 2030. The equivalent in terms of pollution of adding 69 million cars on our roads. Pierre Poilievre wants to slash legislation protecting our environment and allow Canada's largest polluters to pollute without limits, driving up the cost of climate change. We cannot let that happen. Now let's talk about Canada's 2030 emissions reduction plan, a sector-by-sector path for Canada to reach its reduction target of 40% below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. The plan was introduced in 2022 and it reflects input from over 30,000 Canadians, provinces and territories, Indigenous peoples, industry and Canada's independent net zero advisory body. Depuis 2016, notre gouvernement continue de faire des investissements
Since 2016, the government has continued to make historic investments in clean growth and climate change. Carbon pricing is part and parcel of this plan. A carbon pricing plan which makes life affordable and grows the clean economy and provides money right from the outside the starting gates to families. Most families get support from the carbon rebate every 4 months in provinces where the federal system applies.
Estimated to contribute to about a third of emission reduction achieved under Canada's 2030 emission reduction plan. There's a reason why countries around the globe implement a pollution pricing system, because it works. Let me give you a few examples. Entire EU has a cap-and-trade system, which is working. The price is 70 euros a ton, which would make it about a little over $100 Canadian right now, higher than our current $80 a ton. Many other EU countries, including Finland, Switzerland, France, also have a price on pollution. South Africa has a carbon pricing mechanism, as well as New Zealand that is using cap-and-trade with a price of $50 a ton. The ERP includes over 140 programs, policies, and regulations to help Canada bend the curve, such as phasing out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, adjusting Canada carbon rebate amounts in line with the price on pollution, ensuring that the rebate continues to reflect the projected proceed in each provinces where the fuel charge applies. A 20% rural top-up available for households in rural areas and small communities. Cleaner fuels to power our vehicles and industries. Increasing the supply of zero-emission vehicles so more Canadians can make the switch to cleaner and cheaper vehicles. Adding more clean and reliable electricity to help our economy remain competitive. And releasing Canada's methane strategy to cut the emissions of this powerful greenhouse gas across the economy. All parts of the economy have a role to play in meeting Canada's 2030 climate target, from transportation to the oil and gas sector to heavy industry and buildings. Everyone must do their part. Measures like the proposed pollution cap are crucial in addressing emissions from Canada's highest polluting sectors. It also encourages the sector to reinvest in clean energy projects that will cut pollution and create new jobs. We
focus on putting in place foundational measures for the future, and it's much more than just targets. The 2030 ERP is the cornerstone of our emissions reductions plan, but climate targets are only effective if they're backed by credible plans. Once we have a 2035 target, Canada will work towards developing comprehensive policies and plans to help shape the measures and strategies needed to achieve it.
Reduce emissions while growing its economy and supporting Canadians by creating new sustainable jobs in emerging sectors, driving environmental innovation, providing economic opportunities for Canadian businesses, and increasing investment in clean energy projects. We cannot stop now. We need to continue pushing forward. Future generations, our kids and our grandkids, depend on it. Thank you. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Deltel will get the ball rolling. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Welcome, colleagues. Welcome, Minister. It's always a pleasure to see you here at this table. You're welcome whenever you'd like to come. It's with pleasure that we have you here. Minister, as you know, climate change is real and we have to tackle climate change as it stands. What is the ultimate objective? It's to reduce pollution, reduce emissions which are polluting. Obviously, there are two approaches, and a dogmatic approach that we've been experiencing for the past 9 years and a far more pragmatic approach. Dogmatic, well, the proof is in the pudding. Last week, at the same place, at the same time, the Environment Commissioner, in response to a very clear question when he was asked whether Canada was in the process of meeting its 2030 objectives, the answer was clear, no. The Minister is contradicting this. Now, the Ethics Commissioner's report says that among G7 countries, Canada is the worst performer after 9 years of a Liberal government. Worse than that, Mr. Chair, the Minister referred to his participation in COP. I attended virtually. Just a week prior, COP released its climate indicator results, and after 9 years of this government, Canada is what? A laggard. Canada is 62nd out of 74 countries. That's the Liberal track record after 9 years of a Liberal government that's moralistic, and all it does is tax Canadians. Now, 2 weeks ago, Mr. Chairperson, at COP, the Minister referred to the possibility of not just having a first, but a third carbon tax. Was he serious, or was it a joke on his part? Because Quebecers and Canadians don't want another carbon tax. Have you finished? Or is there more that you have to say? Well, first, let me say thank you for the question, and thanks for admitting that climate change is real. I'm not sure that all your Conservative colleagues would say as much, but I'm delighted to see that you believe that it's an important issue. Now, the Environment Commissioner's report, it's important to note that the Commissioner's report refers back to the 1990s in Canada, but you're aware that our government was elected in 2015. Now, when the Environment Commissioner says that Canada is the worst performer in G7 countries, that's vis-a-vis 1996, and that's true. But if you look at the recent years, Canada is one of the best performers among G7 countries, and we can forward that report to the committee, Mr. Chairperson. Canada ranks second of all G7 countries overall. Now, you said that COP released a report and that Canada is ranked 62nd. I think I just need to put your remarks in context. It's not the Conference of Parties that submitted that report. It was the German Watch organisation that submitted. You have the report right there. That organisation does not report to the United Nations. And you're also aware, Mr. Deltel, that Canada's pitiful performance in that report is due to the production of oil and gas. Therefore, unless you're telling me that the Conservative Party is promoting the reduction of the production of oil and gas to improve our ranking in terms of that report, well, I think it's high time that we look at Canada's production of oil and gas, because Canada's performance there is not crash hot. Now, if I could just share a document, a one-page document with members of the committee, I have, and it's in English only, I'm afraid.
2024 Climate Leadership Award. The following award is presented to me, Stephen Guilbeault, for leading advocacy for efforts in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So, alors, c'est un prix que le Canada...
Now, that's an award that Canada's received in 2024. And that's thanks to the efforts that all Canadians have made, along with the Canadian government. And everyone can rejoice in this. And I understand that the award was handed to me, but it's thanks to Canadians' efforts. Minister, I'm glad that you received the report, and it speaks to your level of modesty. But I asked a very specific question. At COP29, you raised the possibility of a third carbon tax, and that would have to do with shipping. Now, is that a joke? Or do you really intend to implement a third carbon tax? That's not true. I just didn't say what you just said that I said. You're aware of all the statements made by President Trump 2 days ago, 25% tariffs. Are you going to drop the idea of having a carbon tax, which would hurt Canadians and our companies and businesses even more in the wake of Mr. Trump's announcements? Response. Well, you know that carbon pricing in Canada leads to annual investments to the tune of $25 billion, and that companies like Dow Chemicals or the Pathways Alliance, which is the alliance of oil sands and tar sands, the new CEO recently called on your leader to clarify his stance on carbon pricing, because it jeopardizes, well, there's a lot of uncertainty given the Conservatives' position and your leader's position. It jeopardizes $25 billion of annual investments in the Canadian economy. And that is what you're depriving the Canadian economy and Canadian workers of from coast to coast to coast. Minister, earlier you referred to emissions emitted from oil in Alberta. Are you aware that the emissions intensity has dropped 15% over the past 10 years? Now, what I mean in saying that is, yes, production's on the rise because there's a high level of consumption, but it's not the production that's contributing to that rise. we're reducing emissions with our current production rates. For the same barrel of oil 10 years ago vis-a-vis today, it's 15% less polluting. Can't you acknowledge that? There have been investigations and the results of which have demonstrated major progress that we've made. Well, I gave you a little extra time. Now, if the Minister has an answer to that question, he can go ahead. We'll double-check and we can provide that figure, but emission intensity doesn't really matter. In terms of the atmosphere, what's important is how the gas and oil sector is growing. Listen, we really went over time there, and it's my responsibility to be the timekeeper and to stick to the agenda. Mr. Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. Unfortunately, Conservative and their leader are in denial mode. They don't agree that the climate change is real, and they don't agree that pollution contributes in a climate change. So you mentioned that pollution cap in your speech. Can you tell this committee why it is important to cap pollution from the oil and gas sector?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali. Well, as I said earlier in French, the oil and gas sector is the largest emitter in Canada, the largest contributor to our emissions. It is the sector that has seen the fastest growth in the past few years, and that is anticipated to continue increasing its emissions. So there's no pathway for Canada to achieve any climate goals unless the oil and gas sector does what every other sector of economy is doing, which is reducing their emissions. We're asking efforts from every single sector, whether it's cement, steel, the auto sector, electricity production, buildings. So we can't, and I'd say morally, we shouldn't let one sector pollute as much as they want. Unlimited pollution, and while we're asking everyone else to make efforts, that simply doesn't make any sense. And now even some CEOs are starting to say that they need to step up to the plate when it comes to reducing their emissions.
Thank you, Minister. All scientists and everyone around the world agrees that the climate change is real, except our Conservative friends and their leader. During the last election, we committed to introducing an emission cap on the oil and gas sector. And 2 weeks ago, you followed through on that promise by publishing draft regulation that would permit oil and gas production to grow while lowering greenhouse gas pollution. Can you explain how it is possible to do both?
Yes, thank you. So the documents we table and the regulatory analysis, impact analysis that was tabled shows, in fact, that under this pollution cap, it is anticipated that the production of the oil and gas sector by 2030 would increase by 16%. So those who say that we're trying to cut production, that's not supported by analysis. But while this is happening, the emissions would go down by 35%, which is significant and absolutely necessary, as I said earlier, for Canada to be able to achieve our 2030 and subsequent targets in terms of emission reduction to get to carbon neutrality. And I should also point out that the government of Alberta, all of the major oil companies in Canada have committed to be carbon neutral by 2050. So what the regulation does is to put a framework to ensure that we start acting soon and that we won't wait until 2048 to say, oh, we haven't started doing what we said we would do.
Thank you, Minister, for making tough decisions for our future generation, realizing that climate change is real. And what would the economic impact of the pollution cap be? Can you elaborate, please?
Well, we think it's going to generate significant investment in decarbonization projects. We're already seeing some projects that have been announced. Strathcona announced a $2 billion project in decarbonization technologies, and we're seeing more and more of these projects come online. And in the last 2 years, Statistics Canada has compiled data that shows that this sector, the oil and gas sector, has collected more than $100 billion in profits. And we feel it's fair to ask them to invest some of those profits, as we are also putting money on the table to help this sector, as well as other sectors, decarbonize the Canadian economy.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about economic impact, last year we gave a Canada carbon rebate to Canadians while putting price on the polluters. 8 out of 10 Canadians are getting their money back more than they pay. And we're also giving Canada carbon rebate to small businesses. Could you please talk about that, how that economic impact is benefiting Canadians and also addressing climate change?
Yes, I don't think I have the data here for SMEs, but we can certainly get that to the committee. We are in the process of returning proceeds from pricing to SMEs. I'll find it, and I'll be happy to come back to you on this.
We're essentially out of time. Madame Posey.
Ms. Posey, thank you very much and welcome everyone to this committee today. I'm going to talk about a measure that is long awaited, that is capping of emissions. You know that the Bloc Québécois is in favour of capping emissions in the oil and gas sector, but when the Prime Minister said in the fall at the UN that Canada was ranked first, that's not true. It's because we still didn't have a cap on emissions, and the Commissioner wrote in his report that the measure was delayed. It was proposed in 2021. The design phase was supposed to finish in 2023. The designing of the regulations wasn't released until December 2023. The draft regulations were supposed to apply to tar sands, but were not still released. And the final regulations were expected in 2025. So we agree with capping of emissions, but we think this is very long-winded, really long delays. Why is it taking so long to implement? The Commissioner's report has confirmed what the Bloc is saying, that it's taking far too long. What's happening? And in the regulations that you published, it states that the compliance period for big oil is 2030, 2032, but the overall targets for Canada was 40 to 45% for 2030. So how is it that oil and gas companies can help to reach the 40 to 45% global target when they're being called upon to do this by 2032, rather? Response. About the time frame, you say that the Prime Minister said we were ranked first, but there are no other oil-producing companies, big oil-producing companies, are proposing what we're proposing. The United States, Norway, Great Britain, the Gulf nations, we're the only country. Some of them have saluted Canada's intentions. And so when there are new regulations being designed, we look at what other countries are doing worldwide, and we learn from each other, we emulate each other, and we build our regulations on that basis. We need to be innovative. We're often the most innovative worldwide. And I'd remind you, before I took up my post, the Clean Fuel Standard, well, we took about 5 or 6 hours before that got through in Parliament. And we're waiting for those new regulations on electricity, on cars, and yes, it took a little bit longer. It will take about 3 years. That's, pretty much within the normal standards, and in fact much more quick than a lot of regulations that have passed over recent years. No, but hold on. My question was that if we ask for less from big oil, well, how can they help Canada to reach its 40 to 45% target? That means that all other Canadian businesses are going to have to do even more, step up to the plate. Companies and everyday Canadians are going to be asked for more, whereas big oil is going to be asked for less. Now, in the Bloc Québécois, we see this as a flagrant injustice. Response. Well, listen, you have to understand what the regulations mean. They will come into effect on the 1st of January 2026. And businesses will have to reduce to the tune of 35% their emissions by 2030. These are regulatory obligations that will be imposed on oil and gas companies. Well, that's all well and good that you're referring to 2026, but listen, if that is the benchmark date to establish the caps for 2030, 2032, big oil is going to ramp up their production. They're going to take advantage until 2026 because they'll know that after that date, they'll have to steeply cut their production. It strikes me as self-evident. Now, this is an incentive, to my mind, for oil and gas companies to ramp up their production. Listen, what you need to understand is that in the sector, oil is a commodity, and a business can decide to ramp up its production, but there needs to be consumers, someone to buy it. So it's about striking a balance between supply and demand. Currently, globally speaking, there's not an increase in supply according to the National Energy Agency. The demand for oil by 2030 is going to go down by about 6 billion barrels per day. So that's about 105 million barrels per day. And please don't quote me because I'm going off my memory, but according to the National Energy Agency, there needs to be a further reduction. So those companies won't be able to just ramp up their reduction willy-nilly because that'd have a huge impact on prices. It'd drive prices down and also the company's profits by extension. Let me cite Ms. McKenna, who was Minister before you. The Bloc Québécois is interested in subsidies to big oil, tax breaks, tax credits, and she said that should never have happened. There should never have been tax credits, but clearly oil and gas sector lobbyists push for it. We give them special access. They're raking in historic profits. They're not investing in the clean transition and clean energy. They're handing their profits over to their shareholders, who are rich Canadians mostly, and they're asking us to subsidise the pollution that they've caused while Canadians pay even more expensive for oil and gas to heat their homes. Now, it's about socializing risk and privatizing profit. Is that what's going on? Why are we willy-nilly subsidizing big oil and gas through tax credits? And, of course, there's the carbon capture and storage, let's not forget. Well, I don't have Ms. McKenna's quote right here, so I can't really venture to comment on it, but as I said earlier, a number of international organisations have acknowledged they're the only G20 country to have wiped up subsidies for fossil fuels, thanks in part to the cooperation of their New Democrats. We have to pass the floor to Ms. Collins right now. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Minister and officials for being here today. Maybe just starting with a yes or no question. Do you think Canada is on track to meet our 40 to 45% target?
According to the Climate Change Institute, yes, we are.
And yet, the Commissioner's report, I'm going to read you the very first line, just the first line. Implementation of measures in the 2030 emissions reduction plan remain insufficient to meet Canada's target. Given that the Commissioner is saying that the measures that you've outlined are insufficient to get to the target, how is it that you and your officials continue to say that Canada is on track?
I believe that report, and the Commissioner, I don't have the report in front of me, but specified that measures like the cap and clean electricity regulations would enable Canada to do more, and these measures were announced after
not meet our targets. We are not on track. And every time that you have come here, you've said that we are on track to meet our targets. Every time your officials have come here, you've said we are on track to meet our targets. It is not true. And the Environment Commissioner has laid it out very clearly. We are not on track. And it is doing a disservice to Canadians to continue to say that we are. We need to do much better. I want to switch for a moment.
I disagree with your comment.
I'm not surprised. De janvier à septembre de cette année, l'environnement et Changement Climatique Canada.
In September of this year, Environment and Climate Change Canada met with oil and gas lobbyists at least 123 times. Can you share with us, with the committee, the content of these meetings with the lobbyists and how many meetings of the oil and gas sector were linked to the capping of emissions?
I think we can provide that to the committee. In any event, it's public with the lobbyists' registry, but all the meetings that we had, and I think it's important to give an overall picture of this. Sometimes there are meetings with Indigenous stakeholders, NGOs, experts, workers, but also representatives from the industry. Well, that's the question you asked, Ms. Collins. I'm responding to it. We can provide that to the committee, no problem whatsoever. What I'm asking here is, do you believe that the lobbyists' goal there was to delay the emissions capping policy? After all, they attempted to convince our committee that this cap wasn't even necessary when they testified back in June. Response: listen, regardless of what these lobbyists said they wanted, they didn't get what they wanted. We proposed draft regulations on capping GHGs for the gas and oil sector, despite the fact that they didn't want that policy. But don't you think that by constantly listening to big oil lobbyists, that's one of the main reasons your government's measures remain inadequate? Response: in a democratic society, we are under an obligation to listen to all stakeholders in these societal debates. I can't see how you can compartmentalize that and say, oh, we're going to go and meet with some organizations and not others. So as I said earlier, Mr. Chair, we will table with the committee a list of all the consultations that we had as we developed the cap on GHGs, and you will note that we met a whole slew of stakeholders across the board.
The previous year, your government met with oil and gas lobbyists 5 times a day, on average 5 times a day. And we've seen time and time again that your government has then watered down policies. It was reported, leaked to the Globe and Mail that your finance minister was considering excess profits tax before the last budget, and then back down in the face of lobbying from CAP, from the big oil and gas companies. I imagine, you came to be an expert witness here at Environment Committee in 2006. I imagine at that time you might have understood and believed that the unfettered access, the constant lobbying from the oil and gas sector has an impact here on bureaucrats, on politicians. And it's surprising to me that you, now that you are a minister, don't see that same influence happening in your government.
I'm saying that despite those meetings, they've been unsuccessful because they didn't want us. You've heard them. They said that it wasn't necessary, that we shouldn't have a cap on emissions, and yet we're moving forward with it. So they've been unsuccessful.
You're moving forward with it, but with compliance flexibility that allows them to emit 20, 22%. That's half of what the rest of the Canadian public has to do. That's half of what the other sectors.
35% in our emission reduction target are 40%.
But with compliance flexibility, it brings it down to the low 20s. The oil and gas sector has a disproportionate impact on our emissions. It is the top emitter in Canada. And
Which is why we're putting in place a cap on the emissions of the sector.
But one that is watered down. And similarly...
I disagree with you.
I hear that, but similarly, if you look at the clean electricity standard...
But I can't follow it. So maybe let's have a question and answer, alternating between one and the other individual, because I find this a very interesting discussion. Go ahead.
I'm hoping that you'll give me a few extra seconds for your intervention. In the same way that we've seen the emissions cap be watered down, in the same way we saw the And if you'll let me finish, Minister, in the same way that we saw your finance minister back off from an excess profits tax, we've also seen the same pattern when it comes to the clean electricity standard and the clean fuel standard, and so many other policies that could be strong, robust climate action.
We're really over time, but I'll give
you.
the minister 30 seconds to.
I disagree with just about everything the member said. We have the most ambitious climate plan in the history of Canada. Our emissions are at their lowest point in 25 years. It's never happened in the history of our country that emissions have gone down while the economy is running full steam ahead. Never. It's the first time ever.
Thank you. Mr. Mazier, to kick off the second round, please.
Thank you. 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. Minister, the United States is threatening Canada with 25% tariffs that would cripple our economy. Will you cancel the carbon tax so our economy can be competitive? Yes or no?
Je vais dire ce que j'ai dit à votre...
Well, I'll respond by repeating what I said to your colleague earlier. Carbon pricing is responsible for $25 billion of investment nationwide annually. If we scrap that, that means scrapping $25 billion of investments, and we're just not going to do it.
Minister, according to your own department, actually, the carbon tax is going to cost our GDP $25 billion. So I don't know where you're getting your numbers from, but your own department is reporting that number.
Je serais très heureux de présenter au comité.
Listen, I'd be delighted, Mr. Chairperson, to table all the documents with the committee to substantiate what I've just said.
40% of Canada's economy is due to trade with the United States. Is it your personal opinion that the carbon tax should remain in place even if Donald Trump imposes these tariffs? Yes or no?
Bien sûr que nous allons continuer d'avancer avec...
Of course we're going to continue with the carbon tax because it creates jobs and it helps us to promote investment and reduce GHG emissions.
Continue on crippling our economy with the carbon tax, even though Donald Trump, you're not standing up for us in Canada here.
Je suis en profond désaccord avec...
I agree entirely with what you just said. Carbon pricing is important. Even the representative from Pathway Alliance is calling on your leader to demonstrate or to clarify his stance on carbon pricing because it threatens investment. Dow Chemicals and other companies, Strathcona, that invested $2 billion in a carbon capture program. There's huge investments with the cooperation of the federal government.
The government made a decision on whether it will increase the carbon tax over $170 a ton past 2030.
Pas de décision qui a été prise sur l'après 2030.
There's no decision that's been made yet until after what's going to happen after 2030.
Just let him finish. Is it something you're considering?
Comme je vous l'ai dit, il y a pas...
As I said, there's no decision that's been made for what's going to occur after 2030 when it comes to carbon pricing.
Will you rule it out today?
Je vais le répéter, si vous voulez, il y a pas de...
I'll repeat, there's no decision that's been made in terms of carbon pricing for post-2030.
Minister, is it possible for Canada to meet the 2030 emissions targets without a carbon tax? Yes or no?
Ce serait...
Well, listen, theoretically, that would require investments of billions and billions of dollars, which we cannot achieve through tax measures. That has to be achieved by way of investments and so on. I don't have the figures right here, but what I can tell you is carbon pricing will help us to achieve 30% of our objectives. So you have to bear that in mind, and you'd have to replace that with other mechanisms. And sincerely...
Minister, I asked you a simple question.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, we have a point of order.
Of course you would.
The member asked a question and the minister is responding. I think a little bit of decorum.
It was a yes or no.
I don't
Chair,
believe that
it was
he's
a yes or
providing
no.
the minister with adequate time to respond in a cordial manner.
I mean, we can't oblige a witness to answer yes or no. I mean, but we can ask. We can ask. Anyway, I've stopped the clock. We will now resume. Again, I find this
Mr. Chair,
discussion
just on the same point of order.
fascinating. I find this discussion fascinating, but it becomes hard to follow it when everyone's talking over everyone else. But yes, Ms. Collins.
Just on the same point of order, I think if one of us asks a yes or no question and the minister understandably can't answer in a yes or no, I think it's fair for the questioner to then move on to a different question.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
I would like to make sure that it remains our time.
It's the questioner's time. They can move on to another question. They cannot force the witness to answer yes or no. But they can go on to another question. I will resume now. I will turn the clock back on.
Minister, will you rule out raising the carbon tax over $170 a ton today for 2020?
Je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, je vais le répéter.
I said it earlier, I'll repeat it. There's no decision that's been made to date as to post-2030 when it comes to carbon pricing. No decision made thus far.
Whoops. Minister, your government gave away $8 billion to mega corporations through the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. Your government claimed this would reduce emissions. However, the Environment Commissioner revealed that over 70% of the companies received money without any commitment to reduce emissions. 70%, Minister. Since learning this, have you personally read any of these funding agreements?
Comme vous le savez, ce fonds-là, Monsieur le Président,
As you're aware, Mr. Chairperson, that fund is the responsibility of the Minister for Innovation, Science and Economic Development. I'd be delighted to ask him to send the committee the results of investments that have been made by way of the Accelerator Fund. I don't have that information right here in front of me.
In your mandate letter, it has here, support the Minister of Innovation and Science for the implementation of the Net Zero Accelerator. It is actually your responsibility to monitor emissions. So here you have an $8 billion program. Over 70% of the contracts gave no commitment to reduce emissions, and you haven't looked at the contracts. You didn't even flag. Did you even question that?
en fait, vous
Did you talk to the minister that was responsible?
Vous dites avec raison que c'est dans ma lettre.
Well, you said rightly that it is in my mandate letter to support the Minister for Innovation in that area. But what I and my department are doing, what I stated earlier, is that the fund and the details of the fund are the bailiwick of the Minister of Innovation, who has that information at his disposal, that we'd be delighted to share with the committee. There's no issue there. Well, we can plan a meeting on that particular issue, says the Chair. Ms. Chattel, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and welcome, Minister. I'm a tad confused too. I heard my colleague, Mr. Deltel, earlier say that the environment is important, but at the same time, the top tool to achieve our climate change objectives is in question, i.e. carbon pricing. Listen, overall, most economists agree. I worked at the OECD. This is a measure that the lion's share of economists agree on. It's one of the most effective. And what's it the Conservatives going to replace it with? We don't know. There's complete radio silence in that regard. Earlier, you referred to the Pathway Alliance. Could you elaborate on that, please? It's an organisation that represents the big oil and gas, and they've stated that investments in clean energy could help them to, in fact, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's the objective of all Canadian taxpayers and businesses and individuals. The Conservatives voted down those investments in the main estimates and budget. Now, there's been a misinformation campaign led by the Conservative leadership. You know, we need this investment, and he's attacking those investments. I'm confused. Can you help me to get a handle on this? Where's this coming from? Or is it just a question of being completely irresponsible? Response. Well, honestly, you're asking me a lot to get inside the Conservative leader's head and explain why and how he thinks. But the CEO of the Pathway Alliance, that represents 85% of tar sands producers, and I'll read this in English.
The production of oil is critical to the sector's future. And Pierre Poilievre's lack of clarity on industrial carbon pricing is jeopardizing the economic basis for the clean technology that provides the only viable pathway to do so. C'est pas Stephen Guilbeault, le ministre de l'Environnement, ce gouvernement qui...
It's not Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of the Environment of the Liberal Party, saying that. It's the CEO of the Pathway Alliance, the Alliance for the Tar Sands. So the Conservatives don't want carbon pricing. They don't want investments. What is their game plan for the environment? Mr. Deltel says that the environment's important and we're not going to leave it up to Quebec to do everything on behalf of all of Canada. Well, perhaps they have a magic wand or a crystal ball. Well, if they have one, perhaps they're keeping it under their rug or God knows. But anyway, I'd like to come back to the Environment Commissioner. He appeared before our committee and to talk about his report. He stated that Canada is currently only 4%, made 4% progress in achieving its emissions. I'd like to hear about the progress that Canada has made over recent years, but what are we going to do to achieve our 4% and exceed it? Response. Well, in 2022, we proposed a plan that evolves over time. There are a number of new measures that have been added, for example, investments, regulatory measures, year after year, in order to go further in our climate action. And the Commissioner said we need to move ahead with capping of emissions. We tabled the draft regulations, and over the upcoming weeks, in all likelihood, we'll be finalising the regulations on clean electricity. And in the first quarter of 2025, our methane reductions targets for between now and 2030. And that's how we're going to achieve our objectives. Year after year, we have to continue to make progress and to put on the table new measures and sometimes to tighten up existing initiatives. We've done this in the case of carbon pricing 2 years ago. We tightened a number of standards because we realized that initially when we put them in place, there were certain tweaks that needed to be made. And I think that's what a responsible government does at the end of the day. You know, I don't think anyone gets everything right out of the gate. So you have to be able to adapt and change over time. Thank you. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair? You have about 15 seconds up your sleeve. Why do you believe that the Conservatives are against capping emissions in the oil and gas sector? Well, if I had to speculate, I'd say the fact that many CEOs of these big companies have organised financing events on behalf of Pierre Poilievre, in fact, at least on 2 occasions. And what I can tell you is that the CEOs of oil companies are not organising financing campaigns on the part of the Liberal government. Ms. Posey, 2.5 minutes. Well, listen, I'd like to, in fact, say something different to Ms. Châtel. The Commissioner last year presented his last report, and he said that the current measures were inadequate in order to achieve the 2030 targets. The main reduction measures were behind, and this year the Commissioner basically said the same thing. Were you surprised by the Commissioner's comments, that, i.e. that over the past year, basically nothing has occurred and that Canada is not in the process of reaching its targets? Response: I agree with the Commissioner that more needs to be done, but since last year, we have finalised the zero emissions regulations for automobiles. We tabled the draft regulations for the net zero electricity grid. We're going to finalise that in the upcoming weeks. We tabled the draft regulations on capping GHGs. So if in your eyes that amounts to nothing, well, I don't know what doing something actually looks like. Well, that's part of the 2030 emissions reduction plan from 2 years back, but there's no timelines, there's no deadlines, and there's no ways of achieving that. On the contrary, let me challenge you right here. This is the most detailed plan that I've seen globally. There are perhaps some plans that I haven't laid eyes on, but if you compare our plan with most comparable countries and G7 countries, you'll see that we have the most detailed game plan. I see. Well, let me come back once again to big oil and gas. Now, you're calling for 35% emission reductions by 2035. But most of the government's plan, the benchmark target is 2005, for example. So can you tell us this target for the oil and gas sector for 2030, Why 2019 as a benchmark? Why not 2005? We're asking, why shouldn't we be asking more of the oil and gas sector? Listen, take another look at the 2022 plan, and what you'll see in that plan is this. Based on the availability and the price of technologies, there are sectors where emissions reductions occur more quickly and others where it's slower. If you look at electricity production, there's been significant reductions. Why? Because wind farms, solar power, the cost of that technology has absolutely plummeted over recent years. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I listened with interest to some of your response to Mr. Deltel just about Canada's rankings. And I was looking at the performance index that is put out. Canada ranks 62 out of 67 in the 2024 performance index on climate change. And, I'm curious, your response didn't completely make sense to me because there are other oil-producing countries in that ranking. Norway is number 12. The United Kingdom is number 20. The U.S., even though they are low down on the list, are still doing better than we are at 57. How do you respond to the fact that we are ranked so low?
Well, again, as I said to Mr. Deltel, the report focuses on notably, not solely, but notably on oil and gas production. It's true that oil and gas production has been going up, but I could talk to you about the Climate Action Tracker that has looked at our performance.
Do you not agree that your government,
G7 Accelerator,
Minister, do you?
One at a time, please. I'll give the floor to Ms. Collins. You can ask a follow-up. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Do you not agree that your government is responsible for regulating the oil and gas industry and ensuring that we are reducing our emissions in that sector?
That's why we've put forward a cap on emissions.
And yet we continue to fail time and time again, and you water down those policies.
That cap has just been introduced. In fact, we're in its draft form. We will finalize it in 2025.
Okay, great. You have come here before, and I've asked you this question, and you have refused to answer. Do you, at this point, or do you feel comfortable acknowledging that the Trans Mountain Pipeline was a mistake?
It's a decision that was made before I arrived in politics.
And yet in 2016, at the Liberal Party convention, you said on pipelines, the atmosphere and our climate certainly don't need them. And many of us believe we cannot build pipelines and meet our international climate commitments at the same time. Given that this government bought a pipeline and that you are a minister representing this government, can you at least now admit that that was a mistake, $35 billion later, increasing our emissions? Can you honestly just tell Canadians that maybe you didn't think it was a good idea in the beginning, but that clearly now it is an economic and environmental disaster?
We're over time. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to circle back on your comments regarding the idea of creating a new global carbon tax on international shipping, which would amount to Canadians' money being sent abroad, I guess. Well, no, I was just looking. I know you said that earlier, Minister, but I see the quote is, "We are very supportive of the discussions that are helping at the International Marine Organization to put in place some kind of levy on international marine transportation." Now, in Canadian context, when you call the carbon levy here, it's the carbon tax. We all know that. So I have to assume that this is a global or international carbon tax that you are espousing here. So my question to you is, we go out and talk to our constituents. We get a sense of what's going on the ground. Do you honestly believe that Canadians can afford another carbon tax right now?
What you're saying is simply not true. What I have said is that there are discussions at the International Maritime Organization, and we're part of those discussions.
Why would you be discussing if you don't plan on doing it?
There's a discussion on a number of issues at the International Maritime
what do you discuss
Organization.
That you don't plan on doing that? Why would you have international discussions if you don't plan on acting on them? What an odd waste of time.
Well, it's a complex problem. We're looking at different. There's conversation on a number of different issues that Canada is a part of. Some of these things will take place, some won't.
Excuse me. This is disintegrating. I've stopped the clock, but we have to have one person speaking at a time, in a Q&A format. So I'm going to start up again now. I guess you had the floor, Minister, I suppose. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
En fait, ce que je disais, c'est qu'il y a plusieurs sujets de conversation.
What I was saying is that at the International Maritime Organization, there are many topics on the table and discussions, and Canada's part of those discussions. We're discussing these many issues with many stakeholders.
Okay, well, let's turn to the carbon tax we know here in Canada that exists. So right now, I'm from Manitoba. It's cold. It's going to get colder. And when I talk to seniors, families, anybody, and they're legitimately at times in tears saying, I have to heat my home. The prices are going up. I also want to feed my kids or myself reasonably nutritious food. And they're having to make tough choices. And again, I'll go back to what I suggested to you earlier, is that when we talk to people, we're aware of the challenges that people are facing. I think it's you can look at GDP numbers, things like that, but when you talk to a human, you understand the challenges that they're facing, or at least I hope you do. So my question is, as a government that espouses the idea of compassion, how do you think it's reasonable to further drive people into energy poverty with a continuous increase in the carbon tax year over year? Well, as per the Environment Commissioner's report, it's not successfully hitting the targets they're aiming at.
Je suis en désaccord avec à peu près tout ce que le député vient de dire.
I agree with basically everything the member just said, Mr. Chair. The federal carbon pricing applies directly and provides more money to Canadians than what it actually costs them at the end of the day. And if the member was so concerned about the living conditions of his constituents, why did he vote down the increase in the Canada Child Benefit and in the dental plan? And why did he not want to reduce the age of eligibility?
My time, Minister.
Je trouve ça un peu difficile à comprendre, Monsieur le Président.
Minister, could I come back to the relevance of the emissions reduction targets, which is the focus of this meeting? Now, last week, one of your officials said that there are additional measures that need to be adopted to meet your emission targets. And earlier in your testimony, it seemed to be very much at odds with what we've heard you say, your parliamentary secretary say, in terms of, I'll quote the parliamentary secretary, "We are ahead of our initial 2030 target and firmly on track to meet the targets set out in our 2030 emissions reduction plan," end quote. Correct me if I'm wrong, you said we have a, quote, fair shot at meeting our 2030 targets in your opening remarks?
Mr. Chair.
How would you connect those two different statements?
Sorry, Mr. Van Coorden has a point of order.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And I know this member is particularly fond of misinformation, but he's used that quote a couple of times out of context. And I think it's really important that if we're going to quote each other in these types of debates, that we stick to the facts.
I understand, but it's not a point of order. Okay.
Thanks, you're not chairing today.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Just when it comes to the repetition of inaccurate information, the House of Commons procedures book actually has, in Chapter 3, talks about when inaccurate information is repeated again and again and again, that it can actually be considered unparliamentary.
I don't know if it's accurate or not. I'm trying to, to be honest with you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yes.
Thanks, and I appreciate that. I know that we're not supposed to accuse members of lying, but when they mischaracterize, especially each other's comments, and in this case it's been brought up a couple of times, there is an original...
I don't know what I mean, this is why we have a discussion, to get to the bottom of it, to find out the truth, and I'd like to keep the discussion going. If we could continue, I don't know who had the floor now. It was Mr. Leslie. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In that same Environment Commissioner's report, it talked about a failure to conduct value for money audits on your climate programs, broadly speaking, which obviously is concerning, particularly with the current green slush fund that's gridlocked Parliament and your refusal as a government to hand over the documents, the Net Zero Accelerator Fund, which we are trying to decipher through, despite our parliamentary request of this committee, very much redacted documents. Will you commit to, in the future, and ideally going backwards, having value for money audits, and in particular as it relates to the Net Zero Accelerator Fund, a actual number of emissions to be agreed upon as part of those contracts?
Évidemment, pour
Obviously, when it comes to most of the programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we work with all partners to ensure that the objectives that are in the contracts are achieved by the businesses. There are a whole array of mechanisms we use, tax measures, direct investments, regulations. So saying that there's just one mechanism we use to reach our objectives is overly simplistic and doesn't reflect reality.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to the Minister for being here today. We really appreciate your standing up for us in Canada by putting in place these provisions to try and address pollution and protect our green spaces in Canada. And I wanted to continue on the price on pollution for a couple of moments. First, I just want to put in context some things that we heard and ask if this is correct, because we heard a comment that the GDP in 2030 would be decreased by $25 billion. That was in the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. I think this is a projection many years out, obviously, and the projection without the price on pollution program, I believe, was $2.68 trillion. With the price on pollution, it was $2.66 trillion, a difference of about 0.5%. And I think sometimes when people put out numbers and don't put them in the context of the absolute numbers, they sound exceedingly large and scary. So I just wanted to see if I'm correct on that. And secondly, these projections do not include, or we haven't compared, the Parliamentary Budget Officer hasn't compared what our economy would be if the climate events continue to increase at the rate they are now. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I believe the Parliamentary Budget Officer himself acknowledged that in his report.
Okay. So we don't
nor does he take into account the benefit of investing in decarbonization.
Right. So we simply have the cost of one program versus a baseline projection, but we don't have that projection with the benefits that are coming from the program in there. So this could easily change. And as we all know, with statistics and projections, that they're only as good as the assumptions, and we're projecting out 2030, and we've got a 0.5% difference. So I would say that for the benefits Canadians are getting of reducing pollution, living up to our international obligations, that this is a very, very small price to pay. And I wanted to also get back to a comment made by the member opposite as well on the Canada Carbon Rebate and the idea of energy poverty. And I know that the member opposite lives in a rural riding. We know that heating fuel was exempted for the next 3 years across the country because it's a very expensive fuel, and those that are usually don't have a lot of money use heating fuel. In fact, their homes haven't been renovated, et cetera. So we've exempted that altogether, so there's no carbon levy on this heating fuel. We also know that the Parliamentary Budget Office states that 8 out of 10 households get more back than they pay, and that through the Canada Carbon Rebate. So if this member is asking for the price on pollution to be cancelled, would that also mean that this check that his constituents are getting, the Canada Carbon Rebate, which give them more than they pay, would that also be cancelled?
Yes, which flies in the face of helping people in a time of affordability issues.
So it would hurt on affordability?
Yes.
Yeah, and lastly, I know again that, as I said, Mr. Leslie's in a rural riding. Perhaps you could comment on the top-up to rural Canadians, because I understand that in these backstop provinces there is a top-up for rural Canadians, understanding that they do have more difficulty with alternatives at times. Is that correct?
Well, there's a famous video from Danielle from Alberta, who 2 years ago said that, in fact, she did the calculation herself and came to the conclusion that she was getting more money than she was paying in carbon pricing, and that on top of that, because she lives in a rural area, she gets a top-up, and now that top-up has been doubled from 10% to 20%, and that Danielle is the Premier of Alberta.
So her calculation would show she even does better now than when she did it a few years ago, because you have a top-up of 20%.
Well, according to her calculations.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to confirm that as the price on pollution or the carbon levy goes up, so does the rebate, so that amount would be compensated through the rebate that the constituents receive in all of our ridings.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair?
About 30 seconds.
Perfect. Then I just wanted to ask a little bit about clean electricity. and the grid we need to expand by 2050. I know that many companies have invested in Canada because we have clean electricity, and we're trying to expand that further. So you can could you share with us what is being done to grow and decarbonize our grid?
So the Canadian electrical sector is really a model for decarbonization. While the sector has grown substantially over the last 2 decades, the emissions have come down substantially. Now, we need to basically double the size of the grid between now and 2050 to meet the demand and the needs for electricity in the transportation sector, industrial sector, building sector.
Thank you. I have to stop there. So this concludes...
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This has been a really good debate. I want to thank all of my colleagues from various parties for engaging today, and I want to thank the Minister for joining. Obviously, as Parliamentary Secretary, I didn't engage today, but our colleague and friend Mike Morris from the Green Party is here, and I'd just like to ask generously from my colleagues from all parties unanimous consent to provide Mr. Morris with 90 seconds just to ask the Minister one question.
Do I have
Does it add a total round for everybody? Because it's going to take away.
No, it would
Why don't you
not,
just give
no.
up a round?
To answer
done
Mr.
after
Meacher's
it-
question, I didn't have time today to
So
share.
do we have agreement to do another round? Does
I don't think
Minister
we
have
have
time?
I don't
another
think we have
round.
the time
90
for that
seconds should
because
be
we
good.
have to go into our second hour, which is on C-73, with the Minister again with us, though with
So will the
different...
Liberals agree just to give up their time for Mr. Morris
No,
to
I'm
ask
just
this question?
asking for,
Look,
to clarify, I'm just asking the
let's cut to the
Conservatives to be
chase. Do we
generous.
have
90
you see or
seconds.
not?
No.
Okay.
No, that's disappointing.
Here for a couple of minutes. Thank you to the officials who accompanied the Minister. We're going to pause and then have a change up of the officials. The Minister will remain with us, but the topic will be different. Nous souhaitons la bienvenue de nouveau à notre ministre.
We're welcoming back our Minister once again. Who's accompanied by Ms. Heather McCready, who's Director of Legislative Affairs. And he's also with Basil Van Haver, who's Director General, Canadian Fauna Service. So this second hour will allow us to look into C-73. An act regarding the transparency and responsibility in regards to certain engagements of Canada. Minister, floor is yours.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank the committee again for inviting me to discuss Bill C-73, an act respecting transparency and accountability in relation to certain commitments Canada has made under the Convention on Biological Diversity, otherwise known as the Accountability Act on Nature.
Very happy to see that Mrs. Collin finally let the motion of the pre-study of this bill go to a vote after she worked with the Conservatives to block it several times. Canada's identity is deeply
Mr. Chair, point of order.
connected to its natural...
Just what's the point of order?
environment.
Just curious if the minister is allowed to present inaccurate information in his opening
I don't know
statement.
if it's accurate or not, Ms. Collins. I don't know how you voted. Well, let's just keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, Mr. Chair. Canada's identity is deeply connected to its natural environment. Our forests, lakes, coastlines, and wetlands are more than just landmarks. They are the lifeblood of our economy, culture, and communities. Canada plays a vital role in safeguarding the world's ecosystems. As the second largest country on Earth, Canada stewards 25% of the world's temperate rainforests, 24% of boreal forest, and 37% of freshwater lakes, along with the longest coastline in the world. As a result, our domestic action has global implications. The growing impact of environmental degradation, from biodiversity loss to climate instability, cannot be ignored. Forestry, agriculture, fishing, and aquaculture are directly threatened by ecological disruptions, with implications for jobs, food security, and public health. Despite the progress we've made, such as the protection of 300,000 square kilometers of land and inland waters since 2017, our work is far from over, and that is roughly half the size of Manitoba. And just 2 weeks ago, we announced the largest Indigenous-led conservation project in the world, Mr. Chair, that will span more than 1 million square kilometers in the Northwest Territories. En 2022, le Canada joue un rôle clé dans la...
In 2022, Canada played a key role in the ambitious international framework on biodiversity, also known as the GBF. The GBF is a vision for 2025 to live in harmony with nature and has 4 objectives by 2050, with 23 global targets to halt biodiversity loss by 2030. In June 2024, Canada was one of the first countries in the world to publish a national strategy to outline how it will implement these targets domestically. At the same time, the government introduced Bill C-73 in the House of Commons. This bill reflects Canada's commitment to advancing efforts to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by establishing a framework for accountability and transparency in delivering our GBF commitments and ensuring sustained action at the national level.
73 would codify Canada's commitment to contribute to these global targets as well as future targets and long-term goals. The bill would require me, as Minister of Environment and Climate Change, as well as future ministers, to develop and submit national biodiversity strategies that align with international commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity. These strategies will outline federal measures and provide opportunities for provinces, territories, Indigenous peoples, municipalities, and other parties to highlight their actions, ensuring a collaborative approach to biodiversity conservation. C'est essentiel car aucun...
This is crucial because no level of government in Canada alone can achieve these results. Our provincial, territorial, Indigenous and other partners, as well as industry and civil society, must work together to guarantee a prosperous economy which relies on resilient ecosystems. That means ensuring the safety and security of communities through science, climate solutions, and by mitigating the impacts of climate change, such as floods and drought and so on.
The Minister will also be required to prepare national reports that align with international commitments under the CBD and assess Canada's progress towards global biodiversity targets. Ces rapports offriront une évaluation de nos réalisations.
These reports will provide an assessment of our achievements and highlight actions that need to be changed and will guarantee ongoing improvements. These will be tabled before Parliament and made public. This bill focuses heavily on Indigenous leadership. Our government recognises that Indigenous peoples for a long time have safeguarded the lands, the waters and ice of this country.
3 requires the integration of Indigenous knowledge into conservation efforts and mandates respect for Indigenous rights, as affirmed by Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Pour soutenir une prise de décision efficace.
To support effective decision-making, the bill also requires that an advisory committee be established. This committee will provide independent advice to the Minister on biodiversity measures, ensuring decisions are informed by scientific disciplines, Indigenous knowledge and biodiversity policy expertise at the national and international levels. The composition of the committee ensures representation from Indigenous partners whose knowledge will complement scientific research, creating a well-rounded approach to biodiversity conservation.
This body can monitor Canada's progress towards achieving biodiversity targets and recommend course corrections when needed. It will also help ensure that the minister can stay aligned with emerging developments in science and policy. At the heart of this bill lie a number of principles, including the principle of intergenerational equity, meaning that our actions today will shape the world we leave for future generations. Bill C-73 ensures that future generations inherit a thriving environment. The bill does not impose obligations on provinces and territories. It provides a framework for consultations and cooperations across all levels of government and society. Biodiversity conservation is a collective responsibility requiring the participation of governments, industries, Indigenous partners, workers, environmental organizations, and citizens alike. To maintain the relevance and effectiveness of this legislation, Bill C-73 mandates a parliamentary review every 10 years. This review cycle aligns with the Convention on Biological Diversity's timeline for setting new global targets, ensuring that Canada's effort remain responsive to emerging challenges and evolving commitments. Mr. Chair, Bill C-73 represents a critical opportunity to reaffirm Canada's leadership in biodiversity conservation and environmental accountability. It is also an opportunity for opposition parties to step up for Canada. It provides the structure we need to deliver on our commitments while fostering collaboration and transparency. This bill is being held up because the Conservative Party of Canada is holding up our important work in Parliament right now. So I'm calling on all parties to prioritize this bill, and I hope that we can come together to look forward to working with all of you to move this important piece of legislation. Ensemble, nous pouvons bâtir un avenir où la...
Together we can build a future with a prosperous nature, ecosystems are restored, and where the public can enjoy a prosperous future. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you, Minister.
6-minute round, starting with Mr. Soroka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I got to ask, Bill C-73, you painted a very nice picture of what this bill is supposed to do, but I guess that's my concern is when the Liberals start talking about things that sound so nice and wonderful, but yet this summer, you've proven that with poor mismanagement of the forest system, there will lack of biodiversity, the lack of prescribed burns, lack of getting rid of the mountain pine beetle dead trees, that yet 1/3 of Jasper burns. So could you please explain to us why would Canadians believe that this bill is actually going to protect the biodiversity of our ecosystems when you've proven that you don't have the abilities to do it right now?
Mr. Chair, the members of the Conservative Party should be ashamed of asking these questions. Between 2011 and 2015, there was 0 hectares of prescribed burns or mechanical removal around Jasper under their watch. They did nothing for 4 consecutive years, slashing the budget of $30 million every one of those years in forest management measures around Jasper, Mr. Speaker. Since we've been in power,
Chair,
we've invested in almost 1,000 hectares of managed forest around Jasper after they did nothing.
Mr. Chair, I guess he's not going to answer the. I guess he's not going to answer the question. He's just going to put blame.
I would love to table in this committee,
already.
Mr. Chair, the report from Parks Canada that shows exactly what I just said.
Mr. Chair,
well, we
please.
go back to Mr. Soroka now.
Thank you. So, Minister, it's easy to put blame when you've been in government for already 9 years, but yet you still haven't done anything. The mountain pine beetle happened underneath your watch. You didn't do enough. Could you please explain how many acres of the mountain pine beetle are affected in the Jasper National Park?
So, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would like to table the report to this committee that was prepared by Parks Canada, which showed how many hectares in the last almost 20 years have been managed around Jasper, which shows exactly what I just said. That for 4
Okay,
consecutive
that's
years,
nice. Then
they
he
did
can-
nothing.
he can supply
We've
that
invested
information
to prepare more than 1,000
Okay,
hectares
Minister,
to manage
you can
1,000
table
hectares
it.
around
Yes,
Jasper.
table
And we'll distribute it, I presume.
So the question, the answer is about 154,000 acres were affected. And with that, to the northwest of Jasper, there still is a lot of trees that were not burned, not touched at all. There's a lot of dead trees there from the mountain pine beetle. What is your plan to deal with this so we don't have another catastrophe and another section of Jasper, if not all of the town of Jasper, burns? What's your plan for these dead trees and to protect the town?
So while they've invested in 0 hectares for 4 consecutive years, since we've been in power, we've invested to better manage 1,000 hectares. 0, 1,000. That's the difference between their approach and our approach, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that sounds very nice.
And
You
now be
want to
happy
bring
to
out
table the
numbers, let's
report
bring
that
out
shows that
numbers
in
then.
this committee.
So
Report, yes, please.
then we're looking at the fact that, there's 32,000 hectares, roughly 80,000 acres were burnt in this last fire in Jasper National Park.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Question the relevance if we're going to focus entirely on.
Well,
on
it's a
this
stretch.
issue.
I must admit, it's
It is
a
a
stretch.
stretch.
But it is about biodiversity. I'm not an expert in biodiversity, but biodiversity affects the health of forests, and I suppose the health of forests determine how vulnerable forests are to fires. I'll let Mr. Soroka continue. You have a little less than 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I guess my question is the fact that the minister even said in his opening comments about forests, so I don't understand this. But anyway, with that, they are planted about 5,000 new trees within Jasper National Park. 500 trees per acre is what it takes for a healthy forest. So out of 80,000 acres, you've planted roughly 10 acres to restore the forest. Don't you think that's basically a joke and you're really not doing much for biodiversity there at all?
What is a joke, Mr. Chair, is to have members from a party who don't even recognize that climate change is real and who are perfectly happy to let the planet burn by doing nothing to tackle the impacts of climate change, that have no plan whatsoever to adapt and to help Canadians and our ecosystems to adapt to the impacts of climate change, come here and take some kind of moral high ground on something they've done nothing on, Mr. Chair, for years and years and years. That's a tragic joke, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's very nice, Minister. So I've got another question then. Minister Randy Bourcineau appointed to the minister lead in Jasper's recovery. Now that he's gone and resigned in disgrace, who in this government is actually in charge of helping Jasper to recover from this government?
The committee is still ongoing and still meeting. In fact, that at our last meeting, we invited the mayor of Jasper so that he can be part of the conversations that we're having for the reconstruction of Jasper.
So you don't have anyone named yet. The minister resigned last week. Are you going to be the person in charge? Who do we actually be able to contact? Because this government has lacked quite significantly in assisting the town recover from this fire.
Your government has lacked. You're right. You can call me. You can call the Minister of Emergency Preparedness. There's
okay,
a number
we're not
of
in
members
government yet, Minister. You do realize you've been there for 9 years, correct?
You realize that you did nothing for 5 consecutive years to help prevent forest fires in Jasper. Nothing. Nothing.
So if the Conservative government did nothing for the years you're talking about.
You're absolutely right.
So then from 2015 to 2024 is 9 years. Can you explain what you have done that's protected Jasper?
Absolutely. We will be happy to.
Mr. Van Koeverden, it's hard enough to follow this two-person exchange without the intervention of other members. I stopped the clock. You've got 30 seconds, Mr. Soroka.
So back to what I was saying then, do you have a lead as to who is going to help Jasper? Because the municipality is suffering substantially because of the fire that was started in Jasper National Park that affected their municipality.
A fire that was likely, according to scientists, a result of climate change, something your own party denies as being real.
Okay, so we'll go now to Mr. Longfield, who's online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for being with us for 2 full hours and showing us your commitment to our committee, as well as the fine work that you're doing on climate change and the exciting legislation that we're going to be discussing today and hopefully in future meetings sequentially so that we can get to the crux of the legislation before us. Thanks to Mr. Van Gouverden for introducing his motion several weeks ago. We've been trying to have this conversation. The Conservatives are blocking. The NDP are putting other motions on the table. It's great that we're finally starting the conversation together because halting and reversing biodiversity loss is one of the great challenges we face. On top of climate change, this is a parallel challenge. If we get it right, we can transition to a nature-positive Canada, working with Indigenous people, knowing that their knowledge will contribute to our solution together. We've got some profound impacts happening on our collective well-being. The University of Guelph looks at One Health and says that One Health is important. And biodiversity loss, through the Biodiversity Institute, we're tracking the results on biodiversity loss, but we have to start recovering from the loss that we have in front of us. Could you tell the members why C73 is so crucial so that our committee can really grab hold of this study?
Thank you very much, Mr. Longfield. And I could certainly answer this question, but we have with us today Basile Van Havre, who was instrumental in helping the world secure the agreement in Montreal in 2022. He was one of the main architects, negotiated this agreement for years and years and years. So okay. I was thinking, with your permission, I would let him ask him why this bill is so important.
Well, we have him here. Let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and it's an honor to be able to address you. The world got together in Montreal 2 years ago and signed an historic agreement setting itself with 4 goals and 23 targets. Coming back to Canada, it is now time to implement, and Minister Guilbeault spoke about the action plan, and together this project we have here. This is an important way to see how we're going to be translating those commitments into actions.
Yep.
And how those actions will be seen by all of you. So I'm actually very pleased to say, after having spent 4 years of my life coordinating for the global community, sitting in front of you to see how this is going to come to the ground and be put into actions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your passion to get us here, all the work you've done to support the efforts of the minister and the department. This is very similar to a study we did a few years ago during the pandemic on the Net Zero Accountability Act. This is a Nature Accountability Act, having audits built into the act so that future governments will continue the work that we're doing, and future Liberal governments for sure will be working on this. We have about 8 months or so before our next election, and I'm hoping that we can see this across the line so that we can talk about how we can build in the same type of protections on nature as we have on climate change. Minister, in the first panel, you talked about Canada's emissions reduction plan and the results from the Net Zero Accountability Act. Could you talk about the parallels or maybe the positive impacts on the Net Zero Act?
Thank you very much, Mr. Longfield. I think it is correct to make a parallel between C73 and the Net Zero Accountability Act in the sense that the Net Zero Accountability Act imposes a certain number of things on our government and future governments. We have to produce action plans like the emission reduction plan that was produced in 2022, and we have to update those plans. They have to be tabled in the House of Commons. They have to be made public. We have to do consultations in the lead up to that. We have to set targets for, we already have a targets for 2030, but for future commitment periods, whether it's on nature or climate. So I think it's about accountability towards Canadians. It's about transparency, and it's about ensuring that the government puts in place the necessary measures to achieve the targets that we set for ourselves.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I was part of the committee then, I'm part of the committee now. The NDP was a very important part of our discussions. Taylor Bacharach was very good at helping us work together. We always need dance partners. The Bloc Québécois, for sure, is always with us on sustainability issues. Conservatives, we know we will struggle with, but it is democracy. We need to have alternate views at the committee. Could you just say how important it is to try to finish this legislation in this Parliament?
I think it is essential to ensure that we are on the right track to meet our 2030 targets when it comes to nature protection and restoration.
Great. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Longfield. Madame Posey.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci, Monsieur Longfield. Madame Posey.
Yes, thank you for being here. In your opening remarks, Minister, you said that a government needs to assume its responsibilities and that we all need to work together. And I think the Bloc stands behind that. Quebec and the provinces look after the land mass, and the federal government looks after the oceans. So the oceans are federal areas of jurisdiction. So let me bring you back in time. The North Bay. All environmental advocacy groups had called on you to not approve the project. You gave it the green light, and environmental advocacy groups, of course, were bitterly disappointed. They didn't. But the project may actually not see the light of day because the investments aren't there and it's not financially viable. And the bill that we have before us is a framework bill that essentially brings us back to what was signed at the United Nations on biodiversity. Now, if we have a framework legislation and yet we have different public policies and we promote the development of oil, won't Bill C-73 prevent North Bay from occurring, the Baie du Nord? You referred to protecting the oceans. When our party came into power in 2015, Canada only protected 1% of our oceans and coastlines. Now we're up to 16%. And if everything goes as planned, in 2035, we'll up that so to about 30% of our lands and our oceans by 2030. Well, that's all well and good on paper. Figures are all fine and dandy. But Ms. Posey, listen, 20%. We're talking about we've gone from 1% to 6%, 16% in an 8-year time frame. I understand, Minister, but listen, we're talking about figures there. But let's deal not in abstract things, but in concrete things. The Baie du Nord was in a biodiversity area that was acknowledged by your government, and yet this project was authorised. It's all well and good to have framework legislation, but you need policies in order to walk the talk and not mine even more oil as much as possible. So Baie du Nord won't see the light of day. But there's other drilling. In 2021, there was an approval of 12 exploratory drillings in Newfoundland, for example, 40 drilling projects that were authorised. Now, Bill C-73 is all well and good. It's motherhood and apple pie, but there's no concrete measures in terms of public policy contained in it. Would Bill C-73, or will it prevent in the future this kind of exploratory drilling in protected areas? As a member of the Bloc Québécois, you're well positioned to know, and you said this as a preface, that natural resources in the Canadian Constitution are a provincial area of jurisdiction. The federal government can't dictate to a province, well, listen, you can't use your oil, just like we can't tell Quebec not to use its hydroelectricity. Same deal. Now, when it comes to the provinces and the use of natural resources, they're sovereign. Where the federal government can and must act, and we do so, is on pollution. But the federal government has to protect the oceans. We agree on that. our objective is to protect 30% of oceans by 2030, the coastlines at the very least. Well, let me refer you back to another bill, C-29, on petroleum products and the regulator. The regulator, in fact, sold off in it's supposed to be protecting biodiversity, and yet it was, and it's the federal government that decided to hand over management for this to the provinces. And yet you decided to auction things off. You've in fact handed the responsibility over to the provinces. Not at all. There's an agreement with Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. It's a joint committee, and Bill C-49, for the first time in Canada's history, will allow for offshore wind farms. There are major offshore wind farms that are being developed in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland currently, thanks to that legislation, and that's highly desirable in my opinion. Minister, you also know full well that it's also to develop offshore petroleum development. Well, no, the provinces already had jurisdiction over that before the adoption of Bill C-49. Bill C-49 doesn't change anything in that respect, but what it adds is the ability to develop wind farms. It wasn't possible before this legislation, and the Conservatives, I should say in passing, are against it. Well, based on our reading, the federal government is offloading this responsibility for the benefit of big oil. So here's my question. Will C-73 prevent the Atlantic provinces from continuing to develop the offshore petroleum development in fragile areas? If it's a protected area, there's going to be no mining. There might be some commercial activities, tourism, fishing that is regulated, but if it's a protected area, no. Once again, you should know this. The federal government can't dictate to the provinces how to use or not use its natural resources. That is in the Canadian Constitution. I don't have to explain that to a sovereigntist party. It should be self-evident to you. Ms. Collins.
But Minister, maybe you can explain it to me, because you did approve the project, and when you approved it, you said it wouldn't cause significant adverse environmental effects and actually referenced net zero emissions by 2050. So on the one hand, you're saying the provinces get to decide, but yet you yourself approved Bain de Nord. And I want to give you the opportunity, because you didn't get a chance to answer my other question, is
Point of order, Mr.
are
Chair.
you...
And now are you keeping the time? I pressed the wrong button. Okay.
My intention is not to disrupt. I'm just curious if Bay de Nord has anything to do with biodiversity. I've worked pretty hard to get biodiversity on the agenda here.
I think it's a relevant question. I find it quite interesting myself, is how this law will interact with provincial jurisdiction and rights over resource development. I think it's relevant.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have? What are you starting me at?
5.5 minutes? Yeah. 5.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Given the interruption, would you mind if I started from the top?
No, you got 5.5 minutes. I'm sorry.
Minister, maybe you can explain how it is you're right now saying you have to throw up your hands and those decisions are only made by the province, when you yourself approved Bay de Nord. You made the decision, you referenced emissions reduction when you were talking about it, and your explanation, you referenced that it wouldn't cause significant environmental harm. And now you're saying to Madame Posey that you couldn't have done anything?
Ce que j'ai dit, en fait,
What I said, and I'll say this in French to make sure I get it right, the use of natural resources in the Canadian Constitution is a provincial area of jurisdiction. The federal government...
Although...
J'y arrive.
I'm getting to that.
I'd like to hear the minister's answer, because it's really important to
And
understand.
I was just clarifying my question, so he understood the question itself.
It's very interesting, this exchange. So please go ahead, Mr. Minister.
Donc, le gouvernement fédéral...
So the federal government when it comes to impact assessments does have a role to play when it comes to some projects, but as you know, the Supreme Court called on us to redefine the role in terms of environmental impact of projects. I'm trying to respond to your question. If you don't want me to answer your question, that's your prerogative. It's your time.
For me, go back to the question that you weren't able to answer, that I asked you around, do you regret approving or being part of a government that approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline, that bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline?
We were talking about Baie du Nord pipelines. Mr. Chair, I'm a tad lost here.
I think we're getting off topic. I think that Baie du Nord is very relevant to the discussion of C-73, but I don't think personally that the Trans Mountain is.
So climate change and weak environmental policies have driven a biodiversity crisis. I hope that the minister would agree that that is threatening essential ecosystems, that your own words, the atmosphere and our climate certainly don't need them when talking about pipelines. Many of us believe we cannot build pipelines and meet our international climate commitments at the same time.
We're back on pipelines, Mr. Chair.
Okay, yeah. If you could veer back to biodiversity, Ms. Collins.
So I'm not sure if you want me to read my same question again that started off with climate change and weak environmental policies drive the biodiversity crisis.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson, listen, this legislation is going to, the legislation we're debating in committee is C-73, and there's going to, in all likelihood, be amendments to this bill. Can we please discuss the bill at hand?
Do you understand that the Liberals don't want to hear the minister's answer to this question?
No, I'm sorry, I understand you don't want this bill to pass.
Okay. Ms. Collins, why don't
Point
you
of order,
continue?
Mr. Chair.
Why don't you continue?
I would just like an apology and for the member to withdraw.
Well, I didn't even really hear what the member said.
She was imputing motives to my questions about.
This happens a lot in this committee.
and it is against the rules, and it is unparliamentary.
Let's
Mr.
put
Chair,
that behind
I've
us.
asked for the member to withdraw and apologize.
I didn't hear what the member said. I mean.
Oui, je vais le répéter. I said that she doesn't want to talk about the bill that we are supposed to talk about. It's C-73.
No,
and
Madam Chatel.
Is it?
You said.
Is
Mark
it
at the end of that. I see. Does she not want to talk about the bill? So you can answer that, Ms. Collins, and go on with your question.
Mr. Chair, I have asked the chair, would you make a ruling on this? It is unparliamentary to impute motives to another member, and so I would appreciate a ruling, first of all. The member said that she doesn't want the bill to pass. This is a very important bill to me.
So, Madame Chatel, tell me that wasn't what you meant, that you don't think, you do believe we all, as members of the committee, want the bill to pass, and then we can move on.
I honestly wondered whether we could talk to this, and it begs the question if she doesn't want to talk
this is actually a conditional, clearly not a withdrawal and apology.
This is not productive. Let's start over. Ms. Collins, why don't you ask your question there from the top? Why don't you actually ask your question from the top?
And so, just for clarity, Mr. Chair, are you ruling?
I'm ruling that we should stop. We should not impugn motives to others in this committee.
So, can I ask for an apology and a withdrawal, please? Then
you can ask for an apology, but I don't.
I'm actually asking through the chair. Can the chair ask for an apology and a withdrawal?
Madam Chatel, I'm sure you didn't mean it.
I apologize. I didn't mean it.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's keep going. Let's keep going. I did stop the clock, but let's keep going.
So, Minister, this is a very important bill to me. Biodiversity is incredibly important. Emissions reduction is incredibly important. And these things are connected. And I think you know that deep down. I think you know that when a government buys a pipeline that will expand the oil sands to ship.
Point of order, Chair. She's impugning some things on the minister. She's impugning that he's thinking something that he hasn't expressed.
Talk again. I must tell you, I intend to be done here at 6:30, so we may not get to a second round of questions at this rate. Ms. Collins, I think you had a good question there, and I think the answer would enlighten all of us. So, can we just move on with the question?
I would like to ask the minister if he's ready to admit that buying the Trans Mountain Pipeline was a mistake.
Point of order.
Oh, come on.
What's the point of order?
Well, I understand Ms. Collins' point that emissions
it's not relevant to the
and
discussion.
biodiversity, but asking for an admission of guilt about something that was done or an admission of statement, I have no idea how this helps discuss Bill C-73
Yeah,
or help with
Mr.
our
Chair,
biodiversity
you
issue at all.
allowed the Conservatives
This is
to
just
ask
pushing
about
somebody for
Jasper. You allowed Madame Posey to ask about Beta Nord. Please give me the
Absolutely.
same
It's the Liberals that are
leeway
stopping
that you
you,
have
it's not
given
the
to
chair.
the other committee members.
Chair, it's not you stopping it.
This is
It's your
very,
Liberal
very
team that's
hard to
stopping
sort
it.
out, I must admit.
Just let her finish the question.
Could we just ask the question and then
I'm sure the minister's quite capable.
Minister I'm sure will have a good answer.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just the Liberal members seem to think that the minister needs protecting somehow.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't.
No, you are not allowing him to answer the question.
Yes. Okay, we're going to stop.
Just ask for an apology and a
Okay, you know
withdrawal.
what?
I
We're gonna
apologize and
pause.
withdraw.
Go ahead.
I'm giving you the opportunity to answer the question.
When we reformed the Impact Assessment Act in 2018, 2019, so before my arrival.
Sorry, did you hear the question about whether you regret?
I'm trying to get to your
Trans
answer
Mountain?
if you'll allow me.
Yeah.
Je vais y aller en français, je pense que c'est plus simple.
I'll speak in French. I think it's simpler. So when we overhauled the environmental impact legislation, one thing we wanted to do was depoliticize the assessment of projects in Canada. We were going to create an agency and give it the tools to do the job, and that agency assesses the projects, does the consultation. It worked for 4 years on projects, and I respect it to date as Minister of the Environment.
That you're answering the correct question so that we're on the same page.
Exactement.
Are you answering it about Trans Mountain?
Ah non, excusez-moi, j'étais sur Baie du Nord.
Yeah.
I was talking about Baie du Nord. I wasn't there back then.
Right now.
J'ai été élu en 2000.
I was elected in 2019.
Government who is spending $35 billion on the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Je pense que j'ai
Do you think
répondu
that was a
plus-
mistake?
j'ai-
I think that I.
No, you have never answered.
I think that I answered your question several times.
C'est peut-être pas la réponse que vous.
It's perhaps not the response you're wanting.
Is not going to answer the question.
That question has run its course, and so we'll go. Can we go on to the next question?
Clearly, the minister will not answer that question.
J'ai
So yeah.
répondu à plusieurs reprises, c'est peut-être pas la réponse que
So-
vous voulez.
I answered on several times. It's perhaps not the answer you wanted.
C-73, I would like to see improvements on accountability, on the biodiversity shield, and on the advisory committee independence. And I'm curious if you are open and hopefully committed to ensuring that targets, timelines, mandatory reporting on biodiversity and nature protection are built in with audits from the Environment Commissioner and a parliamentary oversight to ensure government accountability.
Moi, je suis ouvert en tant que législateur. Je suis toujours.
As a legislator, I'm always open to proposals that will help to improve legislation that is introduced. Now, if what you're proposing will improve things, of course, and the Environment Commissioner doesn't need something in legislation in order to conduct audits on federal legislation and regulations. He has all the powers he needs. Do we need to add another layer of power? But of course I'm in favour of enhancements to the Act.
Progress when it comes to protecting 30% of our lands, oceans, our water. With only 1.1 increase in protected areas between 2020 and 2023. So that brings the total from 12.5 to 16 or 13.6 over 3 years.
Vous parlez de la protection terrestre.
Well, hold on. Are you talking about protecting the land or the oceans? As I reminded Ms. Posey earlier, we went from less than 1% in 2015 to 16% for the protection of our oceans and our coastlines.
2025, like by 2025, and our 30 by 30. So given this limited progress on lands, and if these targets are not met, what mechanisms are you going to include to hold the federal authorities
Unfortunately,
accountable?
the time's up. Time's up. We were well over time here. We have time for, what I'm going to do is we have 6 questioners for the second round. I'm going to limit it to 1.5 minutes each questioner, and we're going to end at 6:30. So, Mr. Leslie, for 1.5 minutes.
It's disappointing that the minister's refusal to answer has limited my time to offer questions on what is a pre-study that I heard a swipe from the minister previously that this is somehow anything to do with politics, when the reality is the parliamentary gridlock has to do with the Green Slush Fund documents. The Auditor General found nearly $400 million of misappropriated funds with 186 different conflicts of interest, while only sampling 25% of this. The fact that that is an excuse for why we need to do a pre-study is appalling to me. If you hand over the documents, we'd be much better off. We could move things forward.
Ms. Taylor-Roy, yes.
Thank you. I don't believe we've ever introduced a green slush fund, so perhaps the member opposite could explain what he's talking about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that intervention. And I want to come to the aid a little bit to my NDP colleague. The impugning of her motivations. That's fine. The impugning of her motivations regarding this bill, I find appalling. I don't know why the Liberals are finding it so hard to believe that my NDP colleague is actually just trying to improve this legislation. But what this legislation appears to be is a plan to make a plan. That I can only see being leading into a whole bunch more government bureaucracy. And since 2016, since taking power, the number of executives at ECCC has risen by 53%, which I find absolutely insane. So, Minister, in order to implement this legislation, will you commit to identifying internal savings rather than new money to make this legislation enacted?
You have 30 seconds, Minister.
Pas sûr que la question en rapport avec le projet de.
Well, the question needs to be related to the bill, but as I explained earlier, this framework legislation is important because our government and subsequent governments will be subject to a series of actions that we will need to take when it comes to transparency on the issue of nature. And I think it's important to have targets and an action plan to achieve those targets. The time's run out, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I've been quite eager to ask a question of the Minister on biodiversity, and I thank all members who supported the pre-study for Bill C-73 to come to this committee over the last couple of weeks. Minister, thank you for coming here to talk about how important Bill C-73 is to protect biodiversity. As we've discussed, the corridors funding is very, very important to me personally. I live in a part of the Niagara Escarpment, which is one of the most biodiverse areas in all of North America, which is surprising for people that live there because it doesn't seem like a rainforest or anything like that, but it's beautiful. And today, actually, on behalf of you, I should offer that I was able to call a gentleman by the name of David Flood, who's an Indigenous man in Northern Ontario. He's part of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, something that I have tremendous respect for. They are fabulous and a great solution for climate change and for the biodiversity loss that our environment is facing. I was able to call him and congratulate him on over $1.3 million in funding for the Wahkohtowin organization. It's like a B Corp. He was describing to me on the phone. They do amazing work, and across the traditional territories of the Brunswick House First Nation, Chapleau Cree First Nation, Missinaibi Cree First Nation, they are going to support the Wahkohtowin Height of Land Ecological Corridor project. It's in partnership with various First Nations. David Flood is an amazing leader and somebody who cares deeply about biodiversity, cultural preservation, and he's working with Parks Canada. Could you elaborate on why this works? So,
Fortunately, Madame Posey.
Ms. Posey, well, listen, the federal government needs to protect our oceans, our high seas, and his government, the Liberal government, authorised drilling close to protected marine areas. Now, we talked about this earlier. There are protected areas, and yet drilling is permitted. Well, it's natural resources. It's an area of provincial jurisdiction. Is this country ungovernable? Is that what you're basically saying, Minister? Not at all. We have different roles and responsibilities, and that's true for all nations, and different levels of government have different roles and responsibilities. Canada's not an exception to the rule. Just go and see what is happening elsewhere in the world. The EU, the United States of America, the Länder in Germany. We're not an exception. We're not an anomaly. It's like that everywhere. Well, hold on. You're protecting the ocean, but you're drilling. I still have time left, right? So you're talking about protected areas, and the federal government is agreeing to drilling in protected areas. That's not true, says the minister. There are commercial and tourist activities that take place. There is fishing. But in the protected areas, there is no heavy industrial activity such as mining or oil production. Question, what about offshore drilling? What about the permits that were issued for exploratory drilling in areas that were recognised by the government as being protected? Your time's run out, Ms. Collins.
Mr. Chair, how long do I have? Thank you. Accountability requires independent oversight and advice. When we were first looking at the Climate Accountability Act, the government wouldn't make a commitment that we wouldn't have industry stakeholders on the Net Zero Advisory. Eventually, after some pushing, your government made that commitment. I'm hoping that you'll make the same commitment with this Biodiversity Accountability Act.
As I said earlier, I'm very open to improvement to the bill as it was tabled, and I think the purpose of this committee is to debate potential amendments, and very open to that.
And I hear that you're open, but I guess I'm wanting a commitment from you. What safeguards will be put in place to ensure that the committee's recommendations are going to be based on scientific evidence and expert analysis rather than industry pressures?
That's other than our commitment that the advice from the committee will be based on scientific knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and best scientific advice.
Can you assure this committee that corporate polluters who would oftentimes, rather prioritize their profit that may destroy nature, that they won't have a seat at this advisory committee?
I think it's a bit, I'm very open again to recommendation as to what the composition of the
So that
committee
is a no. You will not make that commitment today.
No,
Time's up.
That's not what I'm
we'll
saying.
go now to Mr. Soroka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was asking you about the lead-in recovery, and you said that's it for Jasper, that it's still at the committees to go and determine who that is. I was wondering if you asked the Prime Minister to remove your name from that list of being the lead-in recovery because of how you failed at Jasper with the mismanagement of the forest.
I've answered that question many times, and as I said, it was your government did nothing for 4 consecutive years, slashed funding by more than $120 million. We've invested more than $600 million since we've been in power for measures to protect Jasper. So 120 millions of cutbacks, more than $600 million of investment.
Okay,
that's
so
what
you're
I have to
basically
show.
saying that you did not talk to the Prime Minister whether or not you would be the lead from the government side. I also asked the question about the northwest of Jasper that has not burnt in the forest, and all you gave me was an answer that your government had done nothing, but yet, like I said, you've been in charge for 9 years.
Mr. Chair, can the minutes reflect that I'm in complete opposition to what the member just said, and he's saying I'm saying something that I simply didn't.
Oh, okay. So I'm standing corrected. Then the Harper government did do things, just not as much as you'd like then. Okay. So back to my original question.
Mr. Chair, Monsieur le Président, là, il met des mots.
Mr. Chair, he's putting words in my mouth. I didn't say anything that even remotely resembles what he just said. In any event, time's run out. Ms. Chattel, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Well, listen, I'd like to talk about Bill C-73. And I'd like to start by thanking you for your leadership on biodiversity back home in the Outaouais. Your leadership, your department has financed a project, Maninan, which means together we will protect biodiversity in the Ottawa Valley, achieving our targets in the regions. It's Indigenous-led, and without you, this wouldn't have occurred. Now, let me turn our attention to C-73 that I would really like to see get through. You said in response to a question of Ms. Collins, she finally asked an important question on Bill C-73, are you open to amendments? We, of course, are going to study the bill in the committee. I'm really excited about that, and I want to sink my teeth into this study. So here's what I'd like to know. What will the process be if this committee decides to make a number of recommendations? Response, as I said earlier, I'm completely open to amendments. I've tabled a number of pieces of legislation before this Parliament, and the goal of this committee work, the goal of the work in the House and down the track in the Senate, is to produce the best legislation possible. So I'm completely open to amendments. Thank you very much. And what about stakeholders? What have they said? What is the sense you get from stakeholders about this legislation? Unfortunately, time's run out for an answer, and that brings us to the end of today's meeting. And I'd like to thank the Minister for the time that he's given us. And hold on a second, please. Hold on a second. Hold on. Now, I'd also like to thank members for their questions, and which led to a better understanding of the issues. Yes.
If the minister could table his expenses from COP29 trip.
Normalement, je pense que oui.
Yes, the question's been put on the table. I think it takes a certain amount of time to do the math and calculate the expenses for all trips, but I presume, Minister, that once that exercise is completed, of course it's always that kind of thing's always made public, just like all expenditures and expenses.
Takes time. So on that, I would like to adjourn the meeting. See you next week.